This coming session is Leading with Nuance, Confidence and Humility, Communal Leadership in a Culture of Instant Answers and Instant Judgment. Something that's an issue that we all confront, and we will now have that session.
So this is not a clear halachic discussion, but nevertheless, it is about leadership and about Rabbanis. So we live in a changing world, and the changes are so rapid that it's hard to keep pace. Not only in technology, but even more so in culture. Digital technology, social media has a very dramatic and drastic effect on not only what we do, how we act, but on who we are and what is important. And in this day and age, the more vocal, the more arrogant, and sometimes the more outrageous you are, you get the most attention and sometimes the most acclaim. I try very hard to avoid politics or current affairs, always, in my shiurim, in my drushes, but just looking around at who are the leaders of the world today, the most outrageous, arrogant people, and they are admired by many. And this goes against the very essence of Torah leadership. Vo'ish Moshe onav ma'od makol adam asher al pnei hu adamo. So Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest person ever to walk the face of earth. And that is clear in Bavli, in Yerushalmi, in Midrash Chazal, and I could for an hour quote sources which are totally needless. Like Navi Kamoisai, not before, not after. Aval Neviim, I'm quoting the Rambam, Aval Neviim lekoidem lefanav uleboyim acharov. Is it coincidence that the greatest person was the greatest onav? Is it just coincidence? It happens to be? Or maybe these two are two sides of the same coin? So it is clear to me, it is not coincidence. It is the essence of greatness. The more you know, the greater you are, the more you are aware of the limitations of a human being. It's a beautiful drash from the Shvus Yankiv in his parish on the Ayin Yankiv, Iyon Yankov. And when I speak, I always like some interesting biographical comments. The Shvus Yankiv was one of the greatest poskim in his era, going back more than 300 years. And he wrote most Sforim. He is known by the name of his Shalosh Shuvas, Shvus Yankiv. But it's Minchas Yankov and Esavet, Choik Yankov and Hilchas Pesach. He wrote many Sforim. One of the Sforim he wrote, which is somewhat peculiar, is a Perish on the Ayin Yankov. Ayin Yankov is a compilation of a goddess Chazal. So, changing times, and now I go back 100 years, changing times in the positive way. In Europe, very few working people really learned Daf Yomi because people worked hard and most of them were engaged in manual labor. You went to work early in the morning, you come back from Mincha Marav Eshmata, worn out and tired. Most people between Mincha and Marav learned either Mishnayos or Ayin Yankov. Today, Baruch Hashem, hundreds of thousands, maybe even more people, working people really engaged in Torah. And in this room, we have some of the most amazing Daf Yomi Magidei Shiur, who have thousands and thousands of listeners and followers. So recently, I wanted to look something up on Ein Yankov, and I sent one of my Meshamshim, get me an Ein Yankov. He came back, he checked all the 11 shuls in our community, he didn't find an Ein Yankov. And in most shuls in Europe, there were more Ein Yankovs than Shas. Not every shul had a Shas, but every shul had 5 or 6 or 10 Ein Yankovs. And that is when I told the Gabbai of my shul, go out and buy a Ein Yankov. So now we have an Ein Yankov in shul. The Shvus Yankov wrote a perish on Ein Yankov named Iyun Yankov. Why did he see this as so important? He had an eye disease, and the doctor said he's going to lose his vision. And miraculously, we don't know what the procedure was. I don't think it was surgery, but his vision was salvaged. And as a Hidoyel Hashem, he decided to write a perish on Ein Yankov, because it's ayin. And then he wrote this perish Iyun Yankov on the Ein Yankov. Chulin Pei Tes, the Gemara says, Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, Choshkani Bechem Yisrael. Afilu b'shush ani mashpia lachem gedula, atem ematem es atzmachem. Hishpati gedula Avraham Avinu, Av Hamoin Goyim. Many times they say the very first Jew was the very first Rosh Hashiva, and maybe the greatest Rosh Hashiva in history, because the Rambam writes in the first Perek in Hilchos Avodas Kachovim, Ad she'amad eson zeh v'nikbetzu elav alofim v'ravavois v'shosal b'liba mesa'ikar hagodol of emunas hayichud. Tens of thousands of Talmidim, not online Talmidim like many of us have, but physical Talmidim that came to look at him and to hear his words. So the Gemara says, Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ishpati Gedula L'Avraham Avinu V'miyetes Atzmoi. And he says, V'onochi Ofa V'Eifa. Ishpati Gedula L'David HaMelech, who was the greatest king of the entire Jewish land, Yehuda and Shomron. And David HaMelech said, V'onochi Tolas V'lo Yish, Ishpati Gedula L'Moshe Rabbeinu. And he says, V'nachni Mo. So the Ein Yankov says, who was the greatest of the three? Actually, the Gemara says Moshe. So he says, V'oish Moshe onav ma'od makol Adam. Adam is Avraham, David, Moshe. The letters of these three giants that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave so much power and so much fame, and they all were extremely humble. So Moshe was the greatest, and that is why he was most humble. It's not coincidence. That is greatness. And the vast majority of Gedolei Yisrael were so humble and so down to earth and so compassionate. And this goes so much against present culture, in which leadership is vocal and violent and arrogant. So we need to stick to our Mesodas and our tradition. So I had the schus of knowing most of the Gedolim since adulthood, since I grew up, and two Gedolim which I most admire, and I did not have a close relationship with the two of them, but I did see them and learn their Torah, were Reb Moshe and Reb Shlomo Zalman. And why do I most admire these Gedolim? First of all, because of their learning and teaching. Both were Chadshonim, both were extremely original, both were Machadash Chidushei Halacha, and not only following the traditional accepted ideas and norms, and both had the courage to give psak, and more than anything else, both were extremely humble in their personal lives and extremely compassionate, and their midas were so unbelievable midas, and that is such a beautiful combination. Reb Moshe Feinstein was the most humble of person in his personal life, but in halacha he was so strong. I'm sharing with you a story which I heard from a very chos of a person. I'm not sure he wants me to mention his name, but he learned in Tiferes Yerushalayim. And he told me that a Rav printed an entire sefer tearing down the Igros Moshe. Let's not mention names. Probably most of you are familiar with the sefer. Hundreds of pages tearing down the Igros Moshe, and not only disagreeing with halacha, but casting doubt on his personality, on his yiras shamayim, on his midas. And he writes that he's such a balgaiva. And when that sefer came out, the Moshe's children and some of his closest talmidim got together in his room, and they said, how do we respond? We can't let this go without response. So some of them suggested we should write a kuntras proving how ridiculous his arguments are, pashkevilin. And Moshe listens and he says, garnished. Just ignore him. Because any debate will just cause more debate, and Kol Yingalite will start writing tshuvas, who was right and who was wrong. He said, ignore him. His sefer will be totally forgotten. And my tshuvas will be learned in 500 years. Because my tshuvas come from the Lishkas Agozis. What a statement. What a statement, I was shocked. And this person was there, and I know him, and I totally trust him. So the Moshe said, "Meine tshuvas vet malanen and finavindit yo." He believed in Bias HaMashiach. He was so confident that even after Mashiach comes, everybody still is going to learn the Igros Moshe. Meine tshuvas kommen fin lishkas agozis. That's what the Moshe said. What a statement. And this was a humble person. Though ish Moshe onav ma'oid mekal adam. Moshe was a leader. And a leader needs to know who he is. I have a word describing the giants of yore. All the Nevi'im experienced the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Avram Avinu conversed with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Only Moshe Rabbeinu challenged the Kodesh Baruch Hu. That was Moshe Rabbeinu. He threatens the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Im ayin macheninu misifrachu asher kosafto. Whenever I just quote this posik, I feel a tremble. Who is it that could tell a Kodesh Baruch Hu, if you don't do what I say, macheninu misifrachu asher kosafto? So Moshe Rabbeinu had confidence. He had leadership. He had courage. But as a person, Ish Moshe onav ma'oid makol odom asher al pnei adamo. So in a tiny, tiny microscopic way, that is what Rabbanis is about, and that is what leadership, Torah leadership is about. You need to know your strengths, know your weaknesses as well as you know your strengths, but another and humbleness is what is more important than any other personal trait, and it inspires, because arrogance is repulsive, and true Torah leaders are humble, and their personality is humility, and that is the way to lead. And as the Gemara says, Lo yisrora ani noisen lochem, avdus ani noisen lochem. So Rabbanis is about serving the community. So you heard this from me many times, but maybe there are some new Rabbanim that weren't here in the past, and this is a story which I many times quote when I speak to Rabbanim, especially younger Rabbanim than I am, and I seem to be the oldest Rav in this room right now. I still have trouble adjusting because most of my adult life I was always the youngest, and today I find myself being the oldest wherever I come, in every circle I am involved. So the story goes that the three greatest Gedolim in Lithuania once nizdamnu lepundak echad. Rabbi Chiel Mechel Epstein of Novardok, the Yoch HaShulchan, Reb Itzel Aponovich, the Zecher Yitzchak, and Reb Chaim. I say, in the Litvish world for 100 years, when you said Reb Chaim, everybody knew who you meant. Today, no longer. Today, when you say Reb Chaim, most people would think, oh, Reb Chaim of Bnei Brak, not the one from Brisk. So number 3 was Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, Reb Chaim Brisker. And the topic was, how do we define Rabbonis? What is the job description? What is the most important function of Rabbonis? Number 1 to respond was the היוםהשחור, and he said, giving psak. So fitting for what he was. The היוםהשחור was one of the most important poskim. And it is popular nowadays, I don't know why, to me this is so annoying to try to draw a comparison between the Mishnah Brura and the היוםהשחור. They are different in every way. Different personalities, a different type of sefer, but the היוםהשחור did something no one did between the Rambam and the היוםהשחור. No one undertook. And like the Rambam, the היוםהשחור paskind in Kol HaTorah Kulo, Shisha Sidra Mishnah. We are all familiar with the היוםהשחור and Dalet Chakei Shulchan Aruch, but there is an equivalent sefer which is the היוםהשחור Osid and Zroim Kachim Taharis. So the היוםהשחור was the ultimate posik, and he said that's what the Rabbonis is about. If you are familiar with Shalosh Teshuvos Zecher Yitzchak, he's very seldomly quoted in halachic discussion. It was a big mefalpel and a big mechadish, and most of the Zecher Yitzchak is not so much halacha lamaisa. And he said, the tafkad of a rav is harbotzes Torah, to teach the community Torah. And in the big kehillas, usually there were moirei tzedek, moirei hairos. One rav was responsible for the Erev, and the other one for the mikveh, and number 3 took care of the shchita. And the Rav was on top, on the top of the pyramid. So the Rebbe said, the tafkad of a Rav is harbotzes Torah, seeing that the community should be engaged in Torah, it should be a Torah-dik community. What did Reb Chaim say? So the great Reb Chaim was known more than anyone else in his era for his chidushim, and he said the Rav is the father of a community, and maybe the mother as well. Caring for almonas and yesayimim, the needy and the desperate. And that aspect of Reb Chaim's personality is less well known than his greatness in Torah. But we can say about Reb Chaim what the Pasuk says about David HaMelech, v'nikbetzu elov arba meyas ish kol sarua v'chol zav v'chol mar nefesh. Rav Shai, whom did you quote? Did you quote the Rav saying that his Eineklach children didn't like to come to his home because there were always these strange and desperate people filling up Rav Chaim's home? And it was never normal. It was never quiet. So Rav Chaim said, that's the tafkad of a Rav. And whenever I quote the story, I say, this is a sveike diurais in the most literal sense. And sveike diurais la chumra, and achoiz mezeh vegam mezeh al tanach yadcha. So try to revive my memory. I'm an old man, and this happens to old people. How did I get into this story about the 3 Gedolim coming together? Where was I 5 minutes ago? So we spoke about Anova, and so in this day and age, it is more of a challenge than it ever was before. Just realizing that the Rabbanis, I quoted the Gemara, and Rabbanis is serving the community and caring for the community and caring for the members of the community. And so in this day and age with social media, in the louder you yell and the more offensive you are, you get more attention, and people some people admire this. And we need to remember the greatest of the greatest of teachers was Moshe Rabbeinu, vo ish Moshe onav ma'oid makol adam asher al pnei ha'adamot. So we're living in an age, and we cannot ignore what's happening. Well, you know, digital technology and social media, it's part of our life. And we need to acknowledge that it's here, and obviously it's here to stay. And not only it's here to stay, it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. And we need to learn how to cope with it and not ignore it. But speaking to a group of Rabbanim serving communities throughout North America, so leading with nuance, confidence on one hand and humility on the other, that is our tradition, and that is the tradition of the Rabbanis, and those were the greatest Rabbanim we knew. And I just brought two examples, Reb Shlomo Zalman and Reb Moshe, which had extreme confidence in their teaching, in their halacha, in their psukim, and were the most humble and caring people. So, talking about stories, there's another beautiful story that always moved me, and I'm just sharing with you because it's an important lesson about where we are in the Torah world. So one of the greatest Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael was Rabbi Zalman, also a demus which I very much admire. He wasn't a posek like Reb Shlomo Zalman and Reb Moshe, but he was one of the last Rosh Yeshivas Gedolim whose Sefer became a classic, and that is the Even Ozel and the Rambam. So in his later years, he was in Yerushalayim, the Yeshiva of Eitz Chaim, and the story is he once came home from yeshiva, and he was elderly and somewhat feeble, and he arrived at his home, and he stands behind the door, and suddenly he steps back, and he walks around the block once again. And the Talmidim that accompanied him didn't understand. They thought maybe he remembered that he needs to go somewhere. But when he walked around the block and he came back to his home, they asked him, Rabbeinu, Yilamdeinu Rabbeinu, what was this about? We were here 10 minutes ago, and you decided to take a walk. Could you explain? So he said, there's a cleaning woman working in his house, and she's an almana, and when he's not at the house, she sings. And when she sings, makes her feel better. He was standing behind the door, and he heard that she was singing. So he didn't want to bother her. And he decided, let her sing a bit more, it makes her feel better. So he walked around the block for another 10, 15 minutes until he came home finally. Well, at some stage she's got to come home and she's going to have to stop singing. That's a beautiful story of a Gadol B'Yisrael just caring for a simple almana that's singing, and it makes her feel better. Recently somebody wrote about Rabbi Zalman, and he had a new version of this story. After he walked around the block, his Talmidim asked him, Yilamdeinu Rabbeinu, we were here 10 minutes ago. And he said she was singing, and he didn't want to be nichshol for one split second, and kol be'ishu erva. That is why he walked around the block again. So why would one take such a beautiful story and turn it into such a stupid story? You know, it's a silly story. I don't think it's inspiring. It's a stupid story. I mean, he already was nichshel behind the door when he heard her singing, and if he would open the door, it wouldn't take more time than walking back a few steps. So what's the big deal? If you open the door, you come home. The only reason that such a story is distorted is because the one writing this story knows that B'nai Torah would no longer appreciate such a beautiful story. And that could be the only motive to change it and to have a new version. And the question is, why wouldn't we appreciate such a beautiful story, which really speaks volumes about greatness, speaks volumes about what a Gadol is and what a Gadol should be. that the greatest of Gedolim cares about a simple almana and her singing to make herself feel better. I think this is such a beautiful story. If the story would originally be about Kol Beisher Erva, I would have been very compelled to change it into the story about about caring for an almana. But and that's the story. And so this is just food for thought, what we appreciate about Gedolim, what we should appreciate about Gedolim. Their godless and Torah is legendary, is well known, and is appreciated by Talmidei Chachamim. But their humbleness and their humility and their caring and their midas, that is something we need to learn from, and it is more important today than it ever was in the past because of this immense change in culture of the world, and a change which is primarily fueled by social media. The more noise you make, the more crazy you are, the more outrageous you are, you get more, I'm primitive. Likes, is there still such a thing as likes? Likes has to do with email. I don't know whether, I don't know. I'm a very primitive person. I still write with these pens, and I finish a notebook 2 or 3 times a year, so I'm not really updated. And whenever I need Oitzah Chochma, I call my kids and I ask them to send me whatever I need. So, this is what I have to say about this topic. Just follow the footsteps of our real Gedolim with another and shiftless and confidence. Learn and be confident with what you teach and what you paskin, but never forget. So what is another? Personally, my ideas about another evolved a lot. So I'm giving you the update on where I stand right now. Maybe I gave you a different message 5 years ago. What is another? Pashtus in the Sifra Mesa, you need to think everybody is greater than you. And that seems somewhat difficult to me. So I interpreted another as what many Sforim call hishtavos. Who's bigger, you or him? Why would that make a difference? So humble people aren't busy with themselves. Am I great? Am I not? Who cares? Why is that important? So hishtavos means, trying to literally translate the word, equality. So, who cares whether you're great or not? And why would you care? Why would a Kodesh Baruch Hu care? Just do your job and focus on what you need to do. But in the Igeres HaRamban, it is clear, yes, that Ramban says you should think that everybody is choshev than you are. And in recent years, the more people I see, and I have Kabbalat Kahal every morning, and recently we have a new system that people need to make an appointment because it just got out of control, and it still is out of control, even because people make an appointment. I wish I could limit the time I give to people to 5 minutes, but I can't. And if a person comes in and he talks out his heart, and sometimes he could take half hour, what could I do? I'm not going to cut him short. And the more people I see, sometimes I'm just blown away by a simple Jew. I use language that is popular language. I don't know what a poshet yid is. No yid is poshet. By their emunah. And I feel sometimes inferior. This poshet yid with a blue shirt and a little yarmulke, and I apologize if I offended anybody by saying a blue shirt. I mean a pink shirt. And his level of betochen is just unbelievable. And it's tefillos. So there's a story about a great Amoida that went up to the heavens, and he came back and he was asked, what did you see up there? And he said, Elyonim lamata v'tachtonim lamala. It's different. It's different. Some people that are considered so great, nothing up there. And I realize this Poshet might be far greater than you are. You could know Shas, you could be a great Talmid Chacham. Who knows? Maybe to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is far more precious than you are. And maybe you have so much to learn from him in Emunah, in Betochen, in Tefillah, in Tzedakah. And so I think another is Kipshutoi. And I no longer struggle with the concept. And I never underestimate a Yid. No matter how he looks, and doesn't even matter how much he knows. You could never know. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu has the yardstick to measure greatness. So, and this combination of confidence and humility is what Rabbanim and leadership is all about.